Hello, everybody, and welcome back again. Like you all know, I love doing tennis videos. It's one of my biggest passions in life. I usually eat, drink, and sleep tennis. And now the season has ended. I thought to myself, I want to do a video, but what will the topic be? And it's a topic that I have had in my mind for a very long time. And I'm gonna do a couple of episodes where I'm gonna talk about tennis legends from the past. It's through my rear view mirror. I'm gonna go back, and I have selected a couple of players that had a big importance in my tennis life because I've watched tennis for, to be honest, for almost 35 years, and it started in the early 80s. And the first player I'm gonna talk about is a player I didn't watch when I was a young guy, a guy that I always heard from the newspaper, from the radios, from the television. Everybody was talking about him. I saw some picture, I saw some footage that I barely remember. But as older I got, the more I was interested in this guy's career. And this guy is the tennis first biggest icon, the tennis first real superstar to me, the guy that made tennis famous worldwide. He's an icon, and this guy created hysteria around the world wherever he traveled. He was like the first rock star of tennis. It reminded of the Beatlemania. For those who know, Beatles is the biggest group in that world I've ever seen. They were idols for many teenage girls, and this guy had the similarity, but not in that extension. But wherever he went, the crowd follow, the girls follow, and why? Because he was such a good tennis player. He was young, good looking, he was blonde, he was from Sweden, and his name is Björn Borg. And Björn Borg, to be honest, is the man that put tennis on the map worldwide because he had this rock icon status. So wherever he went, people went after him. And he played such a beautiful game from the baseline. He was a solid baseliner, not the server volleyer. I'm gonna go into that later, but he was considered as the GOAT, the greatest players of all time, until a certain Pete Sampras took his Grand Slam record away from him. I know he has won 11 Grand Slams, and I think some of the other players, I think Emerson has won 12 if I can remember correctly, but Björn Borg was the best because the way he played, the way he beat his competition, he was considered as the GOAT, the greatest of all time, until Pete Sampras came up and finished his career. So what can we say about Björn Borg, this young Swede? And he was a part of famous 56 from Sweden, and they have many famous athletes that was born in 1956, and I'm not gonna talk about others, but I'm gonna talk about Björn Borg. He was, I think, voted the best athlete of the century in Sweden, and I can only agree with that award, a well-deserved reward. All right, for those who doesn't know so much about Björn Borg, I'm gonna talk a little bit about him and his career, what I know, what I have picked up, what I have seen. I've seen many of his matches on YouTube. You can see that. Also, if you want, they have some real good footage of Björn Borg. And the breakthrough for Björn Borg, he went amateur pro in 1971 and professional, like the real professional, on the real tour, on the ATP tour in 1973. He was very young at that time. He was around 15 when he started as an amateur and 17 as a real pro, I think, if I remember correctly. And his first biggest breakthrough was in the Davis Cup. He was in the Swedish team that won the first Davis Cup for Sweden, and he was the leader, the key leader in that victory. And after that, people got the eyes and the attention, of course, of Björn Borg. And he was a young teenage superstar that many thought that this guy is gonna compete, but it's like in all sport, you don't know the outcome in the beginning, and the rest is history, as we say it in English. So Björn Borg, his playing style, I'm gonna go into his playing style. He had two things that was significant for his playing style. His nerve, he was ice cold. That's why he called him Mr. Ice. Because he was always calm on court, he didn't hesitate. Even when he was under pressure, he just played like normal. He didn't. You couldn't. He had like this poker face. You couldn't see anything from his face. And of course, the second thing that I think about is how fast he moved on the court. His court coverage. To be honest, I have seen many players around the couple of last centuries, decades, of course, the last decades, and I have to say, Björn Borg is perhaps the fastest player I've seen moving on the court, and the one that is closest to him, I think it's Rafael Nadal. And Björn Borg, he had the most distinct playing style, because he was a baseliner with powerful ground strokes. He was one of the first players that used heavy top spin on regular basis from both his backhand and forehand, and that allowed and generate much power from him. And that's one of the reasons that he was so successful in his career. And of course, he had great athleticism. He was well trained he was one of the best trained athletes on that time. His physique was, you could just go and watch his matches. You see, he was a totally beast when it comes to endurance and physique, and he was very musculate, but and that allowed him to put this heavy topspin from both his backhand and his forehand. His backhand was very unorthodox. He started out with this movement back, and then when he went forward, he just took off his left hand, his right hand, and fulfilled that backhand with one grip, and that generate very, very much topspin. And like I said, he stood back from the baseline, far back from the baseline, and he hit these hard balls, hard balls with these ground strokes that was superb by that time. Because he had many rivals at that time, and most of them played good, but this Björn Borg had something special. Most of them served and volley or stayed at the baseline and just battled from the baseline. But Björn Borg had his top spin. He had an upper hand against those players. And one other thing, because we all know Björn Borg, he won 5 Wimbledons, 5 straight Wimbledons, and he was also in the Wimbledon final, his 6th straight final, but he lost that final to John McEnroe. But at that time, when you played the Wimbledon on this super fast surface, and then you went, and before you went on to Wimbledon, you played at French Open, at the Roland Garros, and that was a total difference. And Björn Borg managed to win 5 Wimbledon and 6 French Opens, which at that time was very, very unlikely. And he had this French Open and Wimbledon double on 3 occasions. I think he has the record for that. I think Nadal has done it twice, if I can remember correctly. So it's a huge effort at that time to win French Open and then go on to Wimbledon. And why? Because Björn Borg, he was underrated serve and volley player. He did this adaptation from the clay court to the grass court like nobody else. You can see in his first match at Wimbledon that he wasn't in his rhythm. He almost lost in one of those matches. I think it was in 77 or 78 to an Indian guy, where the Indian guy, I think he was up 2 sets and were almost completing that upset, this huge upset. But Björn Borg somehow find this way, because Björn Borg, when he started to play tennis, he started to play on his family's garage wall. There where he got his ground stroke, his training from there in the beginning. So this stubborn guy, who by the way played with wooden rackets, and that's even more amazing. If you have played tennis with wooden rackets, you know it's how hard it is to create topspin. But anyway, Björn Borg did that, and when he went from the clay court to Wimbledon, you can see that I told earlier that it took some time for him to adapt, to get into the rhythm. But after that, he combined his baseline with serve and volley, and he had a great serve. He was not the guy that like pumped in 20-25 aces like Roscoe Tanner, one of his rivals, did, because he was the most hard-hitting server at that time that I can remember. And he had some pretty decent rivals at that time. And the first you think of is, of course, John McEnroe. They played 2 epic Wimbledon finals, especially that match in 1980, who some consider as one of the greatest tennis matches that has played in history. And some, of course, put that as number 2 best Wimbledon finals after Roger Federer's and Nadal's encounter in 2008. But that match was, I've seen that match on YouTube 2 times, to be honest, and it was a nerve-biting thrill, especially I think the 4th set tiebreak was one of the best tiebreaks I haven't seen in my life. I think that John McEnroe won that, if I can remember correctly. But anyway, those are the one. That's the match you think of if you summarize Björn Borg's career. It's the final in 1980. So he was up 7-7 in head-to-head against John McEnroe. As you all know, John McEnroe ended his winning streak at Wimbledon in his 6th straight final in 1981. He took the throne from Wimbledon from Björn Borg. But the problem is, Björn Borg retired at the age of 26. The guy accomplished so much in a short time, and finally I heard that he was burnt out. Some say the competition that McEnroe put up made him think that this guy is gonna dethrone him. He stepped aside because Björn Borg was the sourest loser. He hated to lose tennis matches. I know every professional player hates to lose matches, but Björn Borg was something exceptional. I have heard story of him in the locker room after a loss that he was barely untouchable. He did sometimes some things that people didn't think about. I'm not gonna say I don't know, but that's what I've heard. And other rivals like Jimmy Connors, he was 15-7 up. He had a 10-5 advantage over the flamboyant, young. No, he was not young, but the Romanian guy Ilie Nastase, who was the bad boy of tennis before John McEnroe. He was a superb tennis player. I think he has beaten Björn Borg a couple of times in Grand Slam, 1 or 2 times I think. And he was the former number 1 in the world. And then we of course have the clay court legend like Guillermo Vilas, I think is Vilas from Argentina, who was the best clay court player if you look at his clay court victories until Rafael Nadal came. But Björn Borg won 6 French Opens. And then we have this hard-hitting American, Roscoe Tanner, who Björn Borg beat in one of those Wimbledon finals. I think it was 79 maybe, or 78, I forgot the year. And then he beat another legend like Stan Smith. He was 4-2 up in the head-to-head. And he had Rod Laver, an old Rod Laver, because they were from different generation. He was 5-2 up against him, and he was 6-2 up against a newcomer like Ivan Lendl, who he beat at his last Grand Slam victory in French Open 1981. And then he played equally with Arthur Ashe 8-8, but Björn Borg won the most important matches, I think. And beside these 6 French Open and 5 Wimbledons, Björn Borg also was in 4 US Open finals. He lost 2 of them to McEnroe and 2 of them to Jimmy Connors. And at that time, I think they didn't play the US Open on hard court. I think they switched some years to clay. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, that one of those final losses, I think it was against Jimmy Connors, was on clay actually. But anyway, and Björn Borg only played Australian Open 1 time, and that was the first year he got professional on the professional ATP tour. And why? At that time, people were only thinking about 3 majors, and Australian Open was not one of them. And that's why players like McEnroe and the other top 10 players, they did, many of the top 10, they didn't go to Australia. But you know why? At that time, the Australian Open event was in December. And you know, the player had to rest, they had to prepare for the next season. They was not comfortable to go down under to participate. It didn't have the same status as the rest of the Grand Slams, and that's why many of the people didn't go there and play. But later in the early of the 80s, I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe they have played on grass before, but it wasn't grass court Grand Slam at that time. They switched, I think, in 86 or 87 or something like that to hard court. Maybe it was 88, I think, also. And Mats Wilander is the only one that has won both on grass and the hard courts of Melbourne, the Australian Open. He's won his first, I think it was in 1983. They played on grass, and then when he won 3 Grand Slam in 1988. And Björn Borg, he set the start mark for the Swedish tennis boom that exploded in the 80s, where we saw stars like Wilander, Edberg. We have a bunch of other players like Joakim Nyström, Anders Järryd, Henrik Sundström, Kent Carlson, who was a superb clay court player until he got injured. You name it, you had like 10, 15 players in every Grand Slam that was from Sweden. We have Magnus Gustafsson later, Magnus Larsson, and later Björkman came. And you have a bunch of these names that's the part of the Swedish tennis boom that was created, I think, by Björn Borg. He was the main key there. And Björn Borg, even though he left tennis circus at 26, he made a failed comeback in the beginning of the 90s. I'm not gonna go into those matches. And he was the year-end champion 3 times. He was ranked number 1 in the world for 5 times. I think it was 77, 78, 79, 80. From 77 to 80, I think it's 4 or 5 straight years, to be honest. And some of his impressive records, I'm just gonna mention a couple of them, are still stands. They are still standing. And the one I think of 4 of them that was very not hard to beat, of course, but that comes to my mind. It was his French Open campaign in 1978, where he only dropped 32 games in that tournament. And then he won. Another record is that he won 41 straight matches in Wimbledon, from 76 to his loss against John McEnroe in 81. And he had won 41 consecutive sets in French Open. And he have 5 consecutive years where he have won 90% of his matches on tour in that same year. 90% win. And he has one of the highest percentage record wins of all time. He's close to 83% in that number. And he has totally I think it was 64 or 65 titles in his career. and 16 Grand Prix titles. We can say that those Grand Prix titles are today's modern Masters tournaments. And what can we say more about? He had the best percentages against top 10 players. If you look at through the history, he had the highest percentage in winning against his top 10 rivals. That's a record also that is in Björn Borg's hands. And who knows? He ended his career too early. Everybody knows that. He won the French Open and Wimbledon in three straight years, from 78 to 80, and that's huge numbers also. And he won the World Tour Finals. I think it was 3 times he won that. And Davis Cup he won 1 time, and he was the Player of the Year from 1976 to 1980. So Björn Borg, in my eyes, is one of my 2 favorite players of all time. The first one I've told you before, it's Andre Agassi. The second one is Björn Borg. And he was like a movie star, this blonde Swede with huge nerves, with huge game, with huge ground strokes, with huge top spin, just to name it. Alright folks, I have nothing more to add in this subject. Please leave a comment on the comment section if you want. Thanks for watching, take care and bye bye.